job. Yep. So, good evening and welcome to Lean Agile Edinburgh. Thanks for coming along tonight. I'm Stephen McCainch. I'm one of the organisers at Lean Agile Edinburgh, and I'd like to first of all just a show of hands. Who's coming along to the first time to Lean Agile Edinburgh? Well, actually, let's go all the way around. Who's coming along to not their first time? Okay, we've got a bunch. I think there are definitely more people first-timers, so a big welcome and thanks for coming along. So Lean Agile Edinburgh, we started back in 2013 in the Guildford Arms in the East End of Edinburgh. Just a bunch of like-minded Agilists wanting to have a blether about Agile after work, doing lean coffee, and that's how we started. We did that for about a year and a bit, and then somebody had an idea, why don't we actually do a talk one night at a venue? So we got a venue and we posted it that we're going to do a talk, and then numbers started to grow, and we couldn't go back to the Guildford Arms anymore because there's too many of us. So we've got the total at Lean Agile Edinburgh community now is about 2,000 odd members. I think it's kicking on 2,500 now. So, but what we do every month, now we were going to meet up in person mostly, venues around Edinburgh, and just have normally some talks or some activities on anything Agile. So we welcome speakers from the local community. So if anybody fancies doing a talk or an activity, a future meetup, come and have a chat. And we're most welcome to have any ideas and thoughts and activities. So tonight we're obviously at People's Postcode Lottery. So a big thank you to People's Postcode Lottery for hosting us tonight, and thanks for the pizza and refreshments. And I'm going to pass over to Craig to say a few words about People's Postcode Lottery and anything else that we need to mention. Then I'll introduce our first speaker. Okay.
If I use this or not. Hey, so welcome everyone. I think a lot of you will be familiar with People's Postcode Lottery as a brand and our TV adverts that we've got, but what you probably don't know about us is that we have a development team at the People's Postcode Lottery. We've got a team of around about 40 developers. We have 6 cross-functional teams. We're fully in the cloud, and we embrace serverless and AWS. We're building a completely greenfield back office application that's built to run the lottery, pay out prizes and collect money from our players. It's a pretty exciting place to work. It's good to come to work every day knowing that we're raising 32% of the funds that we raise from our players goes to good causes every day. So it's a really nice feeling for our people to come to work and knowing that they're giving something back. And we support roughly, it's just under 10,000 charities from like War Child, Oxfam, right the way down to like your local Scouts and Girl Guides, and everything in between. So yeah, we have some roles open at the moment. So if you're interested, if you search for careers at Postcode Lottery, we have some software developer positions open here as well. So yeah, just want to say welcome and thanks very much for coming. And if the fire alarm goes off, it isn't a drill, and we should exit out the front door. Right, well, thanks very much. Cheers.
Thanks, Craig. Thanks. So I'm going to kick off in a few seconds with our first talk, but the other thing we'd like to do at Lean Agile Edinburgh is just to ask if anybody's got anything they want to share with the rest of the group here, and also hello to the live stream. Hopefully some people watching from home. So if there's any shout-outs anybody wants to share, any upcoming events or anything at all, feel free to shout it out now, or you can also pop it on our board across here, and people can have a peruse in their own time. I will, on behalf of Product Forge, do a shout out. So Product Forge were very kind for many years at Lean Agile Edinburgh to do our live stream and recording. So this session will be kind of recorded and available on the Meetup site afterwards. So big thanks to Product Forge for that. And if anybody wants to get a live stream done, come and speak to Alan. Another shout out for Calba, and our second speaker is from Calba as well, and so am I. So we do Agile coaching and training, And if you want interested in that at all, come have a chat. Any other shout-outs? Oh, all good. Rightio. I think we're ready to go. Great. So, our first speaker is Nathan Bremner from Moonpig. Nathan's engineering manager with Moonpig, but he's going to do a little intro himself. So, without any further ado, I'll pass over.
Thanks very much.
Thanks. Oh, don't need that.
Oh,
Okay.
Yeah, we're good. Thanks very much. Thanks for having me. So my name is Nathan, engineering manager at Moonpig. I've been there about 2.5 years now. And if you're wondering, Moonpig doesn't have a Manchester office, but I kind of snuck away up to Scotland just during the pandemic. So if anyone here happens to be in the Edinburgh WeWork, then you sometimes find me there. So about 2.5 years, Moonpig, most of that's been spent on the editor team. And today, what I really want to talk about is why I think the easiest way through complication is through conversation. And what I mean by that is that I want to talk about why I think modern development is complicated and how teams have expanded to cope with that. I want to talk about the challenges this has caused for us on the editor team, and I want to talk about how we focused on alignment and adapted some of our processes to help solve those problems. Now, I'm not suggesting that I'm not going to stand up here and give everyone another process that they should follow. The idea here is more about trying to share our learnings through trying to solve this problem, because that's normally what I like to hear about these meetups. And I like to hear people's context and how they solve different challenges. So if you want to talk to me about this afterwards, your view of this problem, then I'd really like to hear it. So I'll kick off, but if you want to ask any questions as we go, feel free to just jump in, raise your hand, whatever. So before we dive into it, I want to give a quick intro to the editor team. So Moonpig, hopefully at least some of you know, is an online cards and gifts company specializing in personalized products. So the editor team itself looks after like the core of that USP. So that's mainly the journey around like how you edit a product on the site, as well as like a lot of the underlying services, so like customization, storage, and images, and also like realistic previews, so people know what they're buying across the journey. And we also look after it across different platforms like web, iOS, and Android. But just to dive in, we're always moving forward, and there's one new feature that I'm really excited to talk about, because we think our customers are going to get really excited about it. But before we kind of kick it off as a team, really wanted to try and get a bit of input in terms of who we might need to get involved in terms of building this feature. So the feature we'd like to build is word art. We'd like to introduce word art into the editor. And by that, what I mean is we want to allow people to choose from a bunch of different styles, change the text, play around with like rotation and positioning, and then preview it. And we want to support that kind of across all of our different platforms. So there's a few different things that we need to consider when we're doing this. We need to consider, how do we make sure it's intuitive? How do we make sure that users understand what's going on? We also need to understand, like, is it actually worth the effort in the first place? Are customers going to respond to it? Is it going to be useful for them? We also need to understand, like, when we actually then come to build it, how do we do that? How do we deploy it? How do we test it to make sure that it's going to work? And then we also need to make sure that, like, we can support it across multiple platforms. And then once we've actually got it out in the wild, how do we make sure that it's a success? How do we measure like interaction with it? So with those things in mind, does anyone want to kind of shout out like different skill sets that we might need to get involved in order to help build that product? Any ideas?
Graphic designers.
Graphic designers, yeah, potentially. UX, yeah. Anyone else?
Animation folks.
Potentially, yeah. So I think obviously there's a lot of different things there that we need to consider. And there's a lot of different skill sets that we need to get involved, in terms of being able to do the right things and get the right things in place. So the main kind of elements that we normally need in order to build a feature like this are design. So, we want to understand, how do we actually get something that's intuitive for users and makes sense? And then we have UX researchers get involved as well to help understand, how might customers actually respond to that? What's their feedback to this, and get that early? We've got software engineers, but we've not just got software engineers. We've got front-end engineers, back-end engineers, iOS and Android, data depending on your problem, QA if that's how you choose to solve things. And then you've also got product to help understand, like, does this fit with the vision? How do we carry this through? Is it a viable opportunity? You've got analytics on top of that, kind of helping understand, like, does this all make sense? Like, and how do we track it to make sure it's a success? Now, all of these skill sets are needed even for some features that are seemingly simple as we kind of move forward into like a more connected world. So what we're seeing is a lot of teams are actually bringing a lot of these skills together into individual teams or moving them closer to teams to help with the pace of delivery. But the thing about all of these skills is that because they all need to work together, they all depend on each other, and they all have an impact on how each other skill set can approach their problem. So there's obviously then a lot going on. So what did that mean for us at Moonpig? Well, like a lot of companies, we've gone through a lot of change over the last couple of years, a few major projects, and editors, played a fairly big role in a lot of those. And through those, we've hit a few different challenges along the way due to the complexity of the work. So if you imagine, normally when you're kicking off like a large project or you've got a big feature to build, you've got a lot of deliverables, you've got a lot of different elements going on within the team and between different teams. And the hope is that what you can do is you can all kind of get everything lined up, get all your ducks in a row, and hopefully everything is in place at the right time to make sure people can do what they need to. And then everything kind of flows very nicely through your processes and pops out the other end right on schedule. Unfortunately, that's not quite the way it worked in a few different scenarios, in the editor team. I think over some of these projects, we discovered a few different issues. So the first one was around stalled work. So this is where we might find ourselves in a situation where we're just ready to kick off building a fantastic new feature, and then realize there's actually some key design questions that we've missed and we haven't actually answered them. Or there might be rework required where we get to the end and we're just about to release an A/B test and realize that actually we don't have the tracking in place to be able to support that feature. Or there might be dependencies missing. So there might be key things that we've missed that we need from other teams in order to release that feature. So ultimately, all these things boil down to meaning that we just don't have the right elements ready at the right time in order to do the work, and it's causing a knock-on effect to our delivery. So what's going wrong here? Well, because we've got a bunch of talented people with a lot of different skill sets. They all know what they're doing, and they all want to do the right thing for the product and for the customer. So why is it that we're getting these things wrong? Well, after a few different kind of retrospectives and talking about it in the team, I think we boiled it down to mainly an issue with context and alignment. And what I mean by that is we've got a lot of different specialisms in the team, and each of those specialisms is looking at the same problem in a very different way. They're looking at their subset of the problem. And that's a problem when they all impact each other and they all depend on each other. Because for that to work, we kind of implicitly ask that they all understand each other's context and how they interact with each other without kind of facilitating that within the team. So really, in order to kind of get past that, we can't expect people to read minds, but we do need to kind of get them to understand what's going on with each other. So how do we do that? And I think another important thing here is that we don't want to do it in a way where we just kind of put some kind of gatekeeper in the middle. We don't want to create huge checklists on every feature or every epic, and we also don't want to have someone standing in the middle saying, this is good to go. We want to have the team be able to kind of come together and solve these problems and have the conversations they need to, as and when they need to have them. So this is where, for us, roadmap reviews come in. So the editor approach to this was mainly to focus on the idea of transparency. How do we encourage the team to see what's going on as far as each other's specialisms are concerned, and kind of have a conversation about what each other needs from the other. And that's where kind of we boil down to this idea of a roadmap review. So a roadmap review, in essence, for us, is a regular process we run every kind of 2 to 4 weeks, where the team gets together to take a longer-term view of the direction in the upcoming work. We discuss what the next 3 months look like based on what we know at the time to get everyone on the same page. We talk about uncertainties, we talk about dependencies, we talk about concerns. We check confidence, and we agree actions that we can take in order to try and increase that confidence. So if we look at the roadmap review, the roadmap section, that is basically us walking through kind of what are the major pieces of work that we want to achieve over the next 3 months, with a very rough approximation of time, and trying to call out any kind of external dependencies. The other thing we're talking about here is what we're not going to do. We're trying to explicitly call out things that we know we might need to do by the end of the half, because Moonpig plans in like a 6-month planning period. So things that we might need to do by the end of the half, but we haven't necessarily included yet in like our plan. And then we're also calling out any kind of technical or non-technical milestones that we need to be aware of during that. So this could be when we want to launch a major A/B test, or it could also be like a peak such as Father's Day or Mother's Day, because Moonpig, as you can probably imagine, is very peak driven. So once we've kind of got everyone on the same page as far as like what the view currently looks like, we move on to talking about 3 things. We talk about unknowns. And that's where we discuss like what decisions need to be made that haven't been made yet in order to meet those goals and deliver that work. We talk about uncertainty and approach. What are people unsure about? And we talk about uncertainty and requirements. Where is it that people are like, we're not quite sure what this feature is trying to do or what people want us to do. Then we move on to dependencies. And this is where we're explicitly trying to call out where are we dependent on each other? Where are other teams dependent on us? And where are other teams potentially dependent, where are we dependent on other teams, and where are other teams potentially dependent on us? And then finally, we talk about concerns. And this is where we're trying to get the team to call out, like, where, is there anything that's like significantly missing that should be there? Is there anything like glaringly obvious there? Or also, is there anything that just seems like totally inaccurate? Like there's no way we could do that in that time, or that's like 3 months too late. Then once we've kind of talked about kind of the major concerns that are on people's minds, we move on to a confidence vote. And this is where, by talking about like outliers, we try and get an understanding of any themes that might have not been flushed out. We try and kind of dig into that and understand, well, what's really, what's bothering people that we haven't already talked about. And then finally, we talk about actions to improve. And this could be either investigations into work that we need to prioritize, or discovery. It could be reprioritization of certain work, or it could be conversations that we need to kind of make sure that we have with other teams in order to keep moving forward. And the main goal here for us is for the team to collaborate on a shared view of the direction. Because we want the team to come together and develop as good a view as we can of that direction. And we want them to do it together, and we want them to do it in a transparent way. We also want to make sure that as a result, the entire team understands what that direction is and what their contribution is. And we want to flush out anything that might need to change in order for us as a team to be able to deliver that. So generally, like, this has worked pretty well in terms of trying to make sure that we have the right things in the right place at the right time for each person to be able to deliver what it is that they need to contribute to that direction. For example, like, we've been able to call out, like, do we have sufficient discovery in time to be able to deliver a feature? Are we going to be potentially releasing conflicting tests, or are we going to have too much concurrent work going on at the same time, where that's going to then cause issues for people? So we've been running the process for about 9 months, and it's gone through a few iterations and to kind of adapt and improve it. So what have we learned through that? Well, the first key thing that we've learned is that encouraging that conversation is the essential ingredient. And what I mean by that is that the conversation helps each person understand the overall team context and align on direction, and encourage them to share their context with each other. And that's ultimately what we're trying to do. We're ultimately trying to make sure that everyone is in a place where they can make decisions with the whole in mind. The next important thing is that people see value in contributing to that discussion. Because if people don't see value in contributing to that discussion, then they won't bother. And then we won't be calling out the important things we need to deal with, and issues will continue to happen. So the important thing for us here is that if we raise an action as part of this, this meeting, that we deal with it, that we action it and we demonstrate progress. because that's what helps people feel like there's integrity in that process and that we will continue to adapt and improve. And there's value to contributing. And then finally, one of the big things that, like, personally I learned is that while, like, having enough in place for people to get a good feeling of, like, what the overall goal is, the detail was, like, less important. And what I mean by that is we're often actually avoiding discussing, like, if an estimate is, like, exactly right for a piece of work. What we're actually focusing on is, do we have, like, you know, is the general priority right? Or are there major issues in terms of, like, how we've sized something? So what that means for me is that when I started running the session, facilitating the session, I would often focus on trying to get a picture-perfect view of the roadmap before I put it in front of the team. And I would go around and I would speak to a bunch of different people, you know, all these different specialisms we talked about, and say, is this right? Have we got the right thing? You know, does this make sense? And I was actually preempting the discussion that we've just said was so valuable. And actually, we've now got to a point where sometimes we'll go into this meeting and we all know that that view's wrong. You know, it might be completely off because of, you know, maybe something's come out the previous week or something like that. But the important thing is, and the thing that we can really build on, is when we call that out, because it allows us to build from that as a starting point for the conversation. And it means we can develop that view together, and we can do it in a transparent way. And what that means is that, like, everyone then has a stake in it, and everyone understands where it's come from. It's not just been kind of placed in front of them. And then kind of the final thing on that is, it's perfectly okay for this view to change. We don't have to keep the roadmap the way it is just because that's the way it started. We actually find now that outside of maybe like 4 weeks or so ahead, a lot of this stuff is changing in either priority or size or maybe calling out certain external dependencies. And that's okay, because as long as there's enough there for the team to have the conversation and they're willing to call out anything that they're unsure of, then we're good to go. So what's next? How do we build on that? How do we keep going? Well, there's 3 main things that we want to work on. First off, we want to bring the discussion closer to daily work. And what I mean by that is, like, it's great that we have this session every so often where we get everyone to talk to each other, but what we actually want to do is encourage people to have more regular and more natural conversations around context and direction as, you know, as they're doing the work. And so what we're doing at the moment is trying to take the view of the roadmap that's currently very kind of manually put together and build some processes into our daily work where that view of the roadmap changes as the work changes, as people progress things, as we start to add new work in, because then it acts a bit more like an information radiator and people can use it as and when they need to rather than just kind of relying on it being correct every kind of 2 to 4 weeks. The next thing that we're looking at is kind of sharing this with other teams. So Moonpig, like a lot of Editor, like a lot of teams, doesn't work in a silo. You know, we work with a lot of different teams to support the journey. And so it's important that we share our context with other teams and get their input, and also help them call out anything that we might have missed. And then finally, the third one is around bringing other specialisms in. So currently, like, we've got really good involvement between product and engineering in this process. And more recently, we've been working to try and be more transparent in terms of the design roadmap within the team to help bring that more specialisms into those conversations. But one thing that we would really like to work on is how do we kind of bring you know, even more of those specialisms that we talked about before, like analytics or UX research, and get them involved in some of these conversations to make sure that everything is in place when it needs to for everyone to contribute to that work. So what are the key takeaways then? So first off, feature development is more complex than it's ever been, and it involves more specialisms than ever. Teams have adapted to cope with that by bringing these specialisms together, but it doesn't solve the core issue on its own. And that's because team members don't necessarily understand each other's context, and even though they each have a direct impact on each other. And without a shared view in the team and sharing their context with each other, teams are bound to hit issues with coordination and collaboration. So to make sure teams can deliver, it's important to ensure the team is regularly sharing their context with each other, and they're collaborating on a shared path to those goals. So the lesson here isn't to go and create your own roadmap reviews, please don't. It's that these sessions for us really help to build transparency and collaboration, which is the most important thing in helping teams to get aligned and deliver at pace. So one last thing that I'll just sneak in. I'd be remiss not to say that we, like most companies, are hiring, including in my team, in the editor team, as well as pretty much most of the specialisms that we've talked about today. So if you want to follow the link, or feel free to grab me, we'd be happy to talk about some of the stuff that's going on at Moonpig. So thanks very much. Are there any questions?
So yeah, who is responsible of the roadmap? Because, you know, to me, like you said, you always get good engagement at the start for this roadmap review, 3 months. Then you see when you start the work, things change.
Yeah.
We didn't think of everything. Then maybe you review it, and then, you know, you can easily lose track and focus and say, anyway, in 3 months we'll do another one, and that's it. So who is really focusing on that and saying, are we on plan? Do we need to update? Do we need to discuss again? So who is, you know, you can say the collective, but you always need someone to push.
So ultimately, responsibility for the team delivering what it needs to the company falls to probably, we would look at it as it's between myself as engineering manager and the product manager on the team. I think the important thing to call out there is we're accountable. It doesn't mean we necessarily have to do it all on our own. And I think that's the goal here, is to try and bring the team into that conversation, so that we then know if anything does need to change, we've got the information from them as well, because they're willing to provide it. And then any conversations we need to have with stakeholders or anything like that about things that might change, it's a more collaborative process, rather than it kind of, you know, being like fed up and then fed back down. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. And so to make sure that that happens, do you have like weekly review that you would sit down and really say, okay, let's have a look again towards a roadmap. Are we still okay or not?
Yeah, so we schedule this every kind of 2 to 4 weeks. And that generally depends on like where we're at in terms of either like the half or a project. Like if we're at the start, then there's a lot of change. If we're in the middle, things are probably going pretty steadily. And then towards the end again, everything's kind of coming together and there's a lot of like hoo-ha. So, but yeah, we do it quite, like we do it every kind of 2 to 4 weeks. And it, like, as I said, it does, that 3 month view does change quite a lot. And we're not afraid to do that because that means we can be transparent with other people as well.
How did you find the confidence vote that you mentioned? How did that work when you started things, and what were the results of doing that? Did that then circle back into more discussion about actions that you had to take, and what happened if somebody had like a poor score and everybody else was good?
Yeah. So there's probably 3 scenarios. One is, there's an outlier where like everyone else is happy and dandy and someone's in the corner going, it's all broken. And then the other is everyone's in the corner thinking it's all broken. And then the third is actually where everyone's quite happy. That first scenario did actually happen more often when we first started doing this. And we found that was actually because there were people in the team who had more understanding of certain parts of what needed to be done in order to deliver some of this stuff. And the rest of the team wasn't necessarily as aware. So suddenly they would put their hand up, and we'd say, well, why have you put 4 and everyone else is at 9? And it's, oh, well, because, there's this thing that we need to do and it involves 3 other teams getting involved. And then suddenly everyone else comes down to 4. But that's good because then we align, we get an understanding together and we agree on an action to move that forward. And then hopefully we come back next week and everyone's at 5 or 6. And, we don't tend to see people kind of switch straight from like the bottom to the top. It tends to be pretty gradual, which I think means that people are being honest, which ultimately I'd rather that than everyone kind of scored really highly. And I think that it's good that people have felt like they can be honest there. Does that answer your question?
So you didn't kind of then do a revote after the discussion? It was a one-time vote that you would...
So generally what we would do is we would do we would kind of give people like a minute to vote, and then once everyone's voted, we would then say, right, okay, well, you know, Bob, you've put 5, you're kind of the lowest score, like, do you want to talk a bit about why that is? Or, you know, like, these 2 people, you know, you're scoring really highly, whereas everyone else is down here. Like, you know, what is it that, you know, you think is giving you confidence there? And then a lot of the actions that kind of we tend to take, or some of them at least, come from that conversation. And it's interesting because you would have thought a lot of those points would just be rehashes of what we've already talked about in the first set, you know, in the previous section. But actually we do get some new ideas that come out of that, which is why we've kind of retained that element, as well as being able to track over time. Hope that helps.
Thanks.
So this sounds really interesting. The importance of conversation within this, and in that case, allowing people to kind of revise their opinions in response to new information that may only be contained by one person, and that changes things. I think that's important. To that end, I'm wondering, when you're talking about dependencies and you're trying to get people to have a shared understanding of dependencies, to what extent do kind of visual methods for representing these dependencies? And I'm thinking in particular something like Wardley maps, you know, the kind of value chain maps, where you've got, right, this is what the customer will see. In order for that to happen, this must happen. In order for that, it depends on that, it depends on that. Just having a process where people build out those maps to see if everyone you know, can agree that they're, you know, what the dependencies are and where the likely roadblocks within that will be.
Yeah. So the importance of like visualization to help people understand and build on dependencies. So I definitely think there's value in that. I think that's one of the reasons why like we have like a visual element to it when we talk through it with a team. In terms of like features themselves, there's definitely value in doing that, like within the team and across teams. We've seen a couple of teams do it in larger projects. It's not something that we've got a huge amount of experience in yet. I think it's something that could really help though, because I think one of the problems we have at Moonpig is the way we kind of split down the journey is quite vertical. And so if you ever want to build something that goes like straight across the top, you end up with a lot of complication, and really understanding who needs to be involved to do what can be really complicated. So I could definitely see the value in doing something like that. I think there was the guy at the back had a... Oh, yeah.
Okay, I'll keep it fairly simple. I'm seeing a huge parallel between what you're doing and SAFe. Scaled Agile. I was going to say, I mean, how much have you taken from the essential SAFe platform and concepts? How much have you homegrown?
Well, it's not a deliberate influence. Like, I did SAFe in a previous role, and I do think that there's definitely a piece there of like the confidence vote, and also like, yeah, kind of giving people kind of a chance to kind of comment on dependencies and kind of put the roadmap in front of people and give people a chance to kind of say, here's what I think about it, or here's what I think might be missed. So there are definitely parallels. I think it's maybe just a slightly more, like maybe a bit more informal process in terms of how we do that. And obviously we do it a lot more regularly and within the team. So yeah, I don't know if that really answers your question or not.
Yeah, almost entirely. I think the leading question is, which part of SAFe did you deliberately drop?
It's been that long, I couldn't remember the details. I mean, Moonpig, I think, Moonpig's now like over 20 teams. When I started, it was about 10. So, I mean, we're talking about how this works in a team. There's obviously then the element of, as I mentioned there, trying to figure out how we then branch out and work between teams. And that's where you might start to bring in some of the elements that you might be aware are missing, that I just don't want to explicitly call out.
All good.
Yeah, I suppose it was a follow-up to this gentleman's question about confidence, and that the way you're doing confidence feels very much like story point estimating, like the method of story point estimating with planning poker, where the most confident person, or the person that calls out a 13, the person that calls out a 1 explains. Problems with story points are well known, and they suck. I'm just wondering if that confidence score, if like you go, like I presume you go 1 to 10, right? With
Yeah.
10 being we're super confident we can do this in the time. Have you done any sort of mapping to how that confidence level actually matches to your expected delivery time? And that are you getting an overconfidence error rate or an underconfidence error rate?
No, we haven't. And actually, it's another thing that we haven't really utilized is like, we do like, I think like really informally, I do try and like keep an eye on like how like confidence scores are tracking, but we don't do it deliberately, and we don't like properly like track it. And we actually have a lot of metrics available in terms of throughput and stuff that we could map to that. And I think that'd be a really interesting experiment to do.
I mean, it might well just be end up like the Marder 8 in Windows 95, and that they just track perfectly, but they're really not related.
Yeah. No, I think it'd be really interesting to kind of put those two pieces of data together and see where they correlate and where they don't. No, it's a good point.
Just one question, your roadmap, unless anyone wants to. I don't know, I didn't see a hand up. So if you're planning sort of 3 months in advance, like, and you're quite willing to sort of, like you say, your roadmap changes quite a bit, how do you deal with sort of requirements changing quite late in the day? Does it sort of roll quite a lot back, or can you kind of deal with that flexibility that you've got? Because I can imagine once you said you sort of quite vertical, once you have all these cross-cutting concerns and you've grabbed the team, there's a huge amount of investment. And the problem is with a huge amount of investment is changes, like people really don't like them.
I think there is an element of like, I do try and work with other teams to get ahead of like, outside of this, work with other engineering managers to understand like what's going on, and so that we can at least preempt it like a little bit without kind of killing that conversation. But there's always stuff that comes up at the end of the day. I think sometimes it does cause a lot of like upset, and it's frustrating for me because I do have to go and change quite a lot of it. It's frustrating for the team because sometimes it's like, this is completely different to what it was the last 2 times we looked at it. But the important thing is that we're being explicit about that, and we're having a conversation about it, and we're talking about, well, are there things like that we're not prioritizing in terms of like investigations or things that could help to kind of smooth that down a bit? And we have had some of those conversations, like, could we be working better with some of these teams that are throwing up these last minute issues, to help get ahead of it, or, things like that.
Yeah, it's the really bit of the Agile manifesto that nobody likes. We welcome changing requirements,
Yeah.
isn't it? It's like, no, we don't. No, we don't. It sucks.
Thanks very much, and great talk, by the way. That was really interesting. My question is just about the detail that you put in the roadmap. So we're wanting to provide the team with enough situational awareness and enough of that kind of horizon scan and all that good stuff. But how do you manage yourself and the other people in the team to really just start going into massive amount of detail and just overpopulating it? How have you found that balance?
I think we have had some conversations about this, because there are like I said, we talk about kind of what's coming up and what's not included. And I think we've got to a point now where there's probably like a granularity, like of if it's under like a week or so of work, we don't generally, and I think probably more closer to 2 weeks, we don't generally include it in that roadmap because it just starts to get too complicated. So we are probably talking at stuff that's a bit more like at the epic level than, kind of lower down. And that's something, again, like we're working on a little bit, because then we need to figure out, well, if there's something that's like lots of little bits that all need to come together, how do we make sure those happen? But we try and manage that a little bit more on like, a daily basis in our, stand-ups, and we operate in Kanban, so trying to prioritize stuff in the queue and that kind of thing. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Thanks very much, Nathan. That's
Thanks.
so. Last chance for any final questions. Okay, well, thank you very much. So I think we'll take a bit of a break. Yeah, take a short break for, say, I don't know, 10, 15 minutes, and then we'll have our next speaker. So I think there's pizza left. Yep. Yeah, so there's some pizza to munch through and also drinks as well. Okay, I'll see you back in about, let's say, 15 minutes. Yep. Okay, thanks. Okay, we're going to kick off again. Yep, no problem, no problem. Yeah, all good. So hope you enjoyed I think we've actually ate all the pizza, which is great because like we don't like to waste things, do we? So it's good to eat it all. That's good, excellent. And okay, so our next speaker is Ricky from Calba, who's going to. I'll let Ricky introduce himself, but without any further ado, we'll just go right into it. Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'll do a quick intro. Yeah, so I know some people might need to be away, so I'll do this pretty quickly. Yeah, so the purpose of this is more just to try and open a discussion, offer a couple of ideas, and just allow you to take that away to your teams. Being a UX designer in Agile teams is sometimes not very easy because you move very, very fast and there's not much options. Quick part about me, so yeah, I'm an interaction designer, UX consultant. I help organise UX Edinburgh if anyone's like to come along to that. And recently graduated from Napier, doing a MSc in Computing with User Experience Design. So yeah, the actual conversation I want to have today then is basically about what's it like working as a UX designer in an Agile team. A few tips, a couple of ideas for things that could be worked. As with all Agile teams, it's meant to be flexible, it's meant to be changeable, so really it's just to say a few suggestions. If you are a UX designer, hopefully it'll help you. If not, maybe try and help encourage in the teams for a few different ideas. This is a talk which has been done a couple of weeks at a UCD gathering, so a User-Centered Design conference. So it's sort of aimed more for UX people. I do have a few slides at the start about Agile, which I presume most of you will sort of know. Essentially, Agile is a mindset. There's not a strict rules. There's 4 values, 12 principles. Between that, you get basically an unlimited amount of ways you can work through it. This obviously isn't a sales pitch, so I work for Calba, we do Agile training. I'm not going to try and convince you. There is an Agile overview, an Agile practical, if you're interested, speak to me or Stephen. But we'll have a quick look over the 4 main values, because they to me, they really mirror UX. You know, that's the same sort of idea what UX is aiming to do anyway. So the first one is individuals and interactions over processes and tools. As you all know, you know, if the system's not working for the people using it, really you want to change the system, not the people. You want to try and support people. Software over, no matter how much you try and explain it. The third one, customer collaboration over contract negotiation. So that's a big part about UX. So when you're doing user design, user testing, you're really wanting to involve your customers as much as possible. It's about trying to design something that will actually work from all ends of the aspect. And the last one is responding to change as opposed to following a plan. So even if you have a full roadmap for 6 months, if you start beginning problems, noticing stuff that's not really working, it's better off changing it than it is just continuing on the same path, which is going to lead to a problem down the line anyway. So the main part of Agile sort of framework we're going to look at is Scrum. So it's essentially, if a UX designer goes into an Agile team and they're working in Scrum, most of the teams I've worked in, you've got 2-week sprints. So that's where the sort of issue comes in, is how do you fit in arranging interviews, designing the interviews, speaking to the people, coming up with a conclusion. You know, you've got weeks and weeks of work. So the sort of idea I want to look at is where can that fit? So the basic Scrum, which you've seen, this is from scrum.org, that's your basics. You have your product backlog, you've got all the stuff you want to work on, you go into planning, you take the parts from the backlog that you want to work on, and then your Scrum team works on it to release increments. So your increments are whatever brings value to the system. The main things you really want in a Scrum team is there is the sort of 5 values. So you've got courage, focus, commitment, respect, and openness. So you want to create an atmosphere where people can actually get the time to look, see everything that's happened, give them the opportunity to discuss. So that's where some of the ceremonies come in, such as your daily Scrum, where everyone gets the opportunity to say what I've been working on, what I'm doing today, any problems I have. You have the reviews and the retrospectives to have a proper look over everything else. So it's sort of got a lot of things that can work. Say, hopefully at Agile, most of you will sort of know. So the main focus on the talk I want to do today is on the product owner. So that's where I think the biggest connection with UX and the product owner can come in within an Agile team. So I've got here, so here's your typical product owner. We'll call him Jim. So he's slightly off to the side. he's planning out the work, you know, he's on it, he's wearing a blue checkered shirt. I don't think any product owners in here. There's somebody in a blue checkered shirt. Are you a product owner? No. It's failed. There's another one. No? Yes, can be. You will be soon, don't worry. You're dressed for it. So basically a product owner is accountable for maximising the value of the product. So they're the person there to make sure that it meets the goals it's aimed for. They're accountable for making sure it's effective. And the main part I always like to point out, product owners, is it is just one person, so it shouldn't be a committee. So if you're hired as a product owner, the entire organisation should trust you to do your job. You should be allowed to make the decisions on what you believe is the best value. But I suppose the real question is, how do you find that value? How do you make sure what you're doing is the correct thing? So there's a few accountabilities we can do. So this is kind of top 5 in my mind, what a product owner would do. I won't read them all out, he's fully capable of doing it. But basically, yeah, so get the vision, prioritise it, make sure it's meeting your client's needs. That'll be internal, external, customers, any stakeholders involved. And make sure you're kind of looking at what the market's doing and trying to keep it up to date, you know, as the Agile way. If you spend a year building a product, is it needed at the end of the year? If you're using Agile, you can sort of develop it and change it as it comes along. So going back to the Scrum framework, we know how it all fits. So you essentially have a product owner, you have a Scrum Master, you have 4 developers. So whereabouts would you fit in a UX designer? Quite a lot of teams, which I've worked with, UX is done almost before the backlog. So before anything even goes into production, people are working on it, they're planning it, they're seeing what's needing done. Other teams have it away at the opposite end. So once it's built, we'll do some user testing. We'll have a look at it. You've already made a product, let's test it. It can be hard to believe, but some teams don't have UX in the slightest. So some people just don't have it. I've spoken to people who don't believe in the need because I know what the user needs. Why would I need that? It's nice to believe some teams would have it all the way through. So I would put a UX designer in with the Scrum team. And that's sort of the tips and the sort of stuff I want to look at. So I've got here a picture of James, a standard UX designer in a team. Checkered shirt, similarities here already, you can see them. They're accountable for making sure that the product is the best possible. So making sure there's the best value on the specific product. I always like to point out, you know, it's not just about the customers. When you're working in a project, the clients, the stakeholders, the owners, everyone should be a part of that system. There is sort of, you know, the users of the system come from many different areas, so it's important to focus on all that. So as with the last one, you know, consulting with clients, doing planning, research, competitor analysis, playing back the results to stakeholders, quite an important part, and then analysing all the feedback you get to create the best content you possibly can. So hopefully between them, I've sort of rushed it, but there's similarities. As you can see, yeah, so in order to define the vision, really you need to speak to the clients. So a product owner should be equipped and good at being able to speak to people with the Agile sort of mindset. You can ask the right sort of questions, you know, that sort of all the whys, what's, this, do you really need this? But there is a lot of stuff UX designers have that could really add to that as well. Essentially, I believe that good UX would lead to successful for the product owner. You know, if you're asking the right questions, looking at the right people. So say from the teams I've worked with, I've got sort of 3 top tips. So the stuff that I believe really helped me while working in Agile teams. The first one is you need to be present and engaged. It's very easy to think, I don't have time to come to the Scrum because I need to go and do research. I don't have time to be at a retrospective for 4 hours because do I really add anything? But you really need to make sure you've got that communication within the team. You know, you need to make sure you always know what everyone's doing. From a UX side, from my personal, it gives you a very good opportunity to say, are you using my research? Is this actually being implemented? You know, sometimes it could be overlooked. And the bigger problem, yeah, if you're not attending, you might lose sight of the bigger picture. You know, in Agile teams and development teams, they could be working on a specific enhancement or release. That might change, but you might still be away doing the research on the wrong part of the project, which isn't really needed at that time. And it will also let you know what next is planned. The second one, what I've seen has been a problem quite a few times, is working with developers. So it's quite a good, this is your sort of design v tech, you know. I'm not going to decide who the developer is and who the UX is in that photo. Obviously the developer's the dark side, but that's an opinion, that's not a problem. But yeah, I've seen a lot of problems with, it's not so much saying I'm not doing that just because you want it, but there is a lot of issues with UX people designing stuff with, it'll be possible, you know, I wouldn't say a designer, they could create anything, but is there value in actually creating it? Is there value in trying to design it as an MVP? Or do you want to wait for an enhancement at a later date? Saying that as well, you know, there is also some developer people thinking, well, it's just fancy smancy design, who cares? You know, it's as long as it's there, what do they know? You know, that sort of stuff. But I think, yeah, you really need to, and it's part of being part of a team again, is you really need to allow open conversations and trust and just listen to people. You know, I hate to see people just not agreeing with someone just because of a job title, essentially, or just, you know, you're just saying that because you're this. It can lead to problems, and it can lead to a lot of problems further down the line. The other one I've found, so this is, again, mainly speaking from working in a 2-week sprint. So you don't have time particularly to do a lot of research. Speak to the staff, speak to the actual users. So don't speak to the product specialists, you know, speak to the people who are processing sales or issuing licenses. Essentially, they're sort of doing user research. They may not get all the good feedback, but they get all the bad feedback. They'll get all the pain points, they'll get all the complaints. That's a very quick way to go and have a chat with someone. Same if you're designing a product where you have a staff UI section, you know, they're the actual people using it. You know, I've worked in lots of places where there's been a change to the systems, and you walk in on a Monday morning and you have no idea what to do. And if you have front-facing customers, it causes a lot of frustrations, a lot of problems. So I think there's a real benefit to speaking to the right sort of people. And to me, it's for users from all ends. So that's my kind of 3 top tips. I would say, yeah, so 2 ideas I have mainly. Creating and maintaining a flexible timeline. Like all Agile stuff, that should be the idea. So if we go back to, you know, your standard Scrum plan, whereabouts would you put Agile in there? The only way I can look to try and solve this problem as an Agilist is the obvious way, use Post-it notes. What else could you possibly do? So these ideas, they won't fit all the time, they're not perfect, but it's basically trying to fit the double diamond into a sprint. So you want to discover, define, develop, and deliver. So at the start, before product backlog, ideally, you would be doing some very early research, some very, you know, try and figure out the main pain points, get some ideas. As you're moving along to the start of the sprint, try and sort of start defining some stuff, maybe making some blueprints and maps, just to get the rest of the team to have a look over, is this the sort of right way we're going? As you're slowly getting into developing it, you can start making sort of prototypes, doing a bit of user testing with kind of low fidelity prototypes. So again, none of it should really take you a lot of time. You know, you shouldn't be creating crystal clear, perfect prototypes over 4 weeks when you could do it in a couple of days and just see if it's the right sort of idea. Sort of interaction design can help with devs. And then as the increments are coming out and it's actually going, then obviously you can start doing your user testing, you can start writing up reports, you know, there's a lot of extra stuff you can do there. Sorry, I can share the slides later. The second idea we had, worked in a few teams, was essentially plan ahead. So if you're working alongside a product owner and it's working well, how much detail can you get beforehand? So if these are 2-week sprints, if we're looking 2 sprints ahead, it's only 6 weeks. It's not a massive amount of time, but it's enough time to start doing the research planning. So essentially, don't work on the same schedule as developers. Start a few weeks before, get the prototyping done, and by the time you get to the sprint is to be built, there should be enough there to at least get started and to get going. So yeah, essentially, the main takeaway for UX people is what I'd like to point out is that the product owner should be your best friend. They're looking to deliver the best value they can, and as a UX person, you should be looking for value, which is sort of what UX is all about. So it's mainly making sure you can try and fit into a traditional team. I say it won't always be smooth, it won't always be perfect, you won't always have time to do everything you want. You know, it's another sort of, I suppose, takeaway I've got is the current contract I'm in, I've got access to the staff, so every like 2 weeks we can have an ongoing meeting. Whenever there's enhancements to anything, we can speak to them. How are you finding it? How's it working? Have you got feedback? It's a lot quicker than trying to go out to the actual customers and to try and essentially use up their time as well. So yeah, I've went through that very quickly. I hope you've caught that. Sorry, so yeah. Any questions? Okay, got the microphone, Stephen. It's a bit back.
It's just a question about your last slide, that you want your product owner to be your best friend. I would suggest what you want is the developers to be your best friend. Because you are effectively a gatekeeper between the users and the developers, which is actually an anti-pattern of Agile. We want to bring developers as close to possible. So if you create another road to the product owner, you're going to, you know, the thing we have to solve with Agile is getting developers used to humans, used to other humans, right? We solve that problem. Software is going to get so much easier. So, and it's end users, and it's shrinking that gap. And you know, Scrum's amazing at suggesting that, you know, you can box everything up and do all this thing and keep everyone segregated. But you know, I would suggest that if you have UX, then making them sit with the developers and getting that developer, because you've talked to the customer, you've talked to the user. Like, you are the closest thing to a human they can talk to. Yeah. You know, so going to the product owner who has really got a different agenda than the developers, I think you should really get closer to the developers.
Yeah, I see that, yeah. My sort of thinking's most of the developers I've worked with take a ticket and build what it says. So to me, you want the ticket to say something different, which will come from the person who's writing the stories. But yeah.
You know, writing stuff down is the worst way humans have developed to communicate. And Agile says quite a lot about that. Actually, one of the things you said is, you know, people and interactions. So again, we've got to help developers stopping pushing them away into corners. Yeah. Like, developers will do that anyway, right? We know that. That's,
naturally.
The developer mindset is to just go off and hide and pretend they're special. So we've got to really pull these people out, and it's the best way to build software is to shrink this gap between humans using their software and the guys writing it. So yeah.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah. I'm just going to say Nathan's nodding so much. A clear developer. I don't know if you're nodding until you go into the cupboard and just hide.
I loved how you shone a light on the value that you know, what UX designers like really bring to a team. I think it's great, and not everyone necessarily understands just how much you guys do to add to that. I think the question I had was, what's one thing that you think the Scrum team could do to make your life easier as a UX designer?
4-week sprints. 6-month sprints would be lovely. No, I think just, to be honest, I think the teams I've worked in have been extremely helpful in general and great. The experience I've got is more, see, I'm more a people person anyway, so I like to work, so say the developers, I like to have chats. I try and get developers to design meetings. They're like, oh, it's nothing to do with me. And it's like, well, when I design a very complicated table with 400 columns, but half of them are blank, it's a problem for you because you need to build it. So, you know, it sort of comes into it. But yeah, I think it's, trying to use these sort of things. And, you know, I know some of the teams I've worked in, developers have had a lot of problems with UXers by designing things that aren't able to be built or will take a very long time to build. And a lot of Agile teams, it's based on minimal viable products. So it's always about, let's release the value, let's get there quicker. And the UX person's like, but no, we need it to do all this. And that's what the user wants, and that's what the user needs. And a lot of the time, you know, it's not. And it's the same even with UX interviews and design a lot of the time. You know, UX in itself at times needs to be a bit more agile. It needs to not ask the big questions about what would be your perfect system in the whole world. You know, it's what would be a system that would work? What would be a system that would be easy? What would you expect in the future? You know, that sort of thing. So, but yeah, see, you know, most of the teams I work in, I can instantly go to the developers and say, I want to have a chat, I want to get to know you. I've got a bit of more front-end experience as well, so I don't tend to design stuff that I don't think would be possible. And if I think that could be tricky, I would check first, you know, because I'm also a great believer in, well, I usually call it working lazy, but working smart. So I don't like to create things and build prototypes. You know, I use the government system quite a lot, so I don't want to spend 8 hours making a massive prototype for somebody to say that doesn't work or that won't be very good. Or so I like to check in and keep an eye on it and stuff. So I think that's as the first person said, you know, try to keep everyone in the loop all the time, as Agile should be. You know, it's at a daily scrum, you expect everyone to be there. At design meetings, people are like, oh, that's not really my part, but whereas it should be. You know, people should try and be at every part of it. I suppose the problem at times, if meetings are 2-3 hours long, you know, that's a kind of problem as well. Try to keep things a bit easier time boxed out with the ceremonies as well. But yeah.
Well, that's great, thanks.
So when we were talking about planning and doing research 2 sprints ahead, how do you know you need to start when there are 2 sprints more? Yeah,
so most of the teams I've worked in, there's been a roadmap. So roadmaps can change, which isn't great. But essentially, we try and look at, you know, you might have sprint 10, 11, we're going to build this. Sprint 12, 13, this is A, and 14, 15. So it's sort of, if you can get in a place where you don't want separate backlogs, but you essentially have people looking further forward, sort of what a product owner would do anyway, you know, making sure there's always going to be something to be built. You know, the kind of last thing you want is to start a sprint with nothing for the developers to build, because that's essentially why it's there in my mind. You know, that's kind of what you're really looking for, is it? So it's making sure you've got a few sprints planned ahead, and if you're, you know, obviously your experts are going to be very good at coming up with it, but if you want a bit more detail and a bit more delved into will this work, which won't be needed all the time. You know, if it's specific systems that need to work a certain way. But if you're building a new product for people or a new website, or say Moonpig, if you're going to, the developers are all working on, let's add word art. If you asked your customers, does anyone want word art? Does everyone? I mean, of course, yeah, it's a terrible example. When it came up, I was like, yeah, I use Moonpig. Why not? Yeah. So yeah, GIFs, that's what you need to work on. Movable GIFs on paper. But yeah, so working together, I mean, as Agile is, you know, working together and keeping on it, but I think a couple of people having an eye on what's coming next. I mean, let's say you've just done 2 weeks worth of research and someone says this sprint's not happening, it's in 6 weeks' time. It's not really a big problem. If it's in a year's time, then yeah, maybe that's going to, you know, if they say we don't need it at all anymore. But that is just the kind of the world we live in, isn't it? That's the sort of, it's the same idea. Developers could start building something and 2 weeks later decide, oh no, that didn't work, or you know, it's just trying to do as much as you can to get yourself in the best position to actually do what you're going to do.
So what sort of balance do you have typically in practice between getting information about how the product works and the user experience from talking and listening to clients versus observing clients? Because I'm thinking, I just remember years ago, there was someone in an office who had a calculator and Excel open and was just calculating all of these numbers and then manually putting them in. Now, as far as this person was concerned, they were using Excel, so they tick it. But in terms of someone looking at it, aware of these other features, they'd know that there are certain features in that software that they weren't aware of or they weren't comfortable using. So what sort of balance do you have between observing, perhaps in some cases maybe a little bit surreptitiously, versus actually speaking to people and relying on their feedback about how they rate themselves and the product?
Yeah, definitely, yeah. And I mean, yeah, I know plenty of people who use Excel. and you know, what's a formula? That's not required. Yeah, it's obviously at the early stages it's ridiculous and difficult. You know, you can't show them it. When we have prototypes, so one of the kind of ongoing things I have just now is with one of the staff members, and it's actually kind of easier on Teams almost, as I share my screen and give them control. And whenever I want to test a new aspect, so if we've added an enhancement to a system, I usually start with, can you walk me through what you would normally do? So I always recreate, so we've got a UAT, you know, a testing area, where I recreate an application or something with real life scenarios and ask him just to go through step by step, what do you do? And it always comes up with interesting things, you know, always, and every time you do it, you could do it every 2 weeks and it'll come up with a slightly different problem. A recent one we had was, he said, oh, I've got a document where I copy and paste. And, you know, because it's essentially the same stuff. And I was like, oh, well, to save you needing to do that, we could try and add into the system the options. You know, if you've got 5 options you always pick, instead of typing it, you could pick one. You know, that would make your life easier, it would be better, it would be consistent. Can you send me a Word document? 27-page Word document comes through. I think, well, you can't put that in a system. that's far too much. But that's like an example of where some things come up where you think, you know, if you're needing to check something and you're needing to leave this system or go back out of what you're doing to go into a different bit to check a text line or a bit of information somebody's given you, we can then add that in. In the real world, you know, we could sit next to people and we could watch them. I'm quite a fan of kind of spending a day with your colleagues type thing, so you can go and sit with a dev for a day and see what we do and laugh at them, and then go and sit with somebody else for a day, and you know, but that sort of thing. Whereas in Teams online, it's kind of easy to share screens. But for me, it's a big part of. So I sort of like to, when I have these staff meetings, like cognitive walkthroughs, I always make sure like the line manager's not there, or then it's just like me and them, and it's a kind of, you can be honest, you can be open, you know, transparency, because there might be stuff you might not want to say to some people which is actually quite annoying and causing you problems. And the final sort of question I always have is, has this improved? You know, how long did it used to take you versus to now? Is there value? You know, is it actually working? And if not, what could make it better? So.
Just quickly, when you were talking about, you get hypertension, which is where, where people are concerned about doctors. So they're, you know, the measurement you're getting in that context, in terms of how, you know, screwed someone's health isn't what they normally are. Is there any sort of analogue of that with user testing? It's like, can you tell when people are particularly concerned or agitated about being watched? Yeah, I think
if you know people, if you're good with people, that's easier in a room. You know, that's easier in person. I would always sort of, you know, I start any sort of research or anything like that, just kind of friendly conversation, having a chat. If you notice sort of signs, I mean, that's kind of psychology almost, isn't it? But if you notice signs of them feeling a bit stressed or a bit anything like that, then you can try and put their mind at ease. You know, some people, testing's always easier, you know, you want the user to say they're happy to give feedback. Sometimes, you know, I've had user testing where it's just a 2-hour rant about something they don't like and it's not very productive, but that's just part of it, you know, that's if they're there to speak about a specific thing. But yeah, it's certainly one of the tricky areas about it, you know, and it goes back to, as I said, I always try and make people feel comfortable, you know, make sure that the boss isn't there, the line manager, somebody who could essentially give them into trouble for doing it wrong. But there's no real way to put someone at ease completely. You know, if somebody's anxious about the way they look, you're not going to see it. You know, they're going to hide it, they're going to be actors, they're going to be masters at disguising that sort of stuff. So, but yeah, I think it's trying to allow them. You know, I know that's a big problem with sort of, when you do testing, when you're like reading eye tracking and stuff like that, you know, people get paranoid. I made a little video for Napier, so I was there, they want me to help with their undergraduate stuff. And the guy said to me, he was like, so a very simple thing, I'm just going to ask you to walk across this room. And I was like, okay, fine, yeah. And he went, don't worry about how you walk. I was like, okay, yeah. It's like, I don't, which leg? Because I don't, okay, you know. And so it's that sort of trying not don't point out the problems, you know, just try and have it as a natural conversation. Like, I always, you know, even life in general, I try and treat everyone like they're a friend. You know, hello, how you doing? You know, as if you're not a stranger. You know, so I think that sort of, if you have the right sort of people, the right sort of empathy, it's not going to be right every time. But yeah, it's, I suppose even just asking, do you feel comfortable? What would make you comfortable? Is there a better situation? A lot of people don't like online Zoom stuff, so if you can arrange to meet up in person, if that's preferable. But yeah.
I feel bad if I that kid at the end of the class that, like, you know, when everyone's like, want to go home, and they're like, do you do your homework? Miss, do we have homework? And everyone's like, shut up. I was just going to ask, so you talked a little bit around a lot of the stuff that UXers can do to build relationships with developers and, you know, putting themselves out there and being like, this is what we do. And I think that's really important. And I also really liked your point about how UXers need to get less academic and perfect about their work and more agile. But this might be a controversial question. Do you think, or what would you say developers could do to make friends with UXers? And do you think that should even be something they should think about doing?
There's not many developers in here, is there? I mean, yeah. I think it's just that teamwork. You know, I believe, you know, if you agree to work somewhere and you agree to work in a certain way, you should do your best. So if you're working in an agile team, and part of that is a big part about openness and trustfulness, you should be allowed. You know, it's something I've found really. So I worked in a lot of customer service jobs and worked with a lot of people who very obviously showed to me, customers, everyone. It's weird with UX agile. You enjoy it, don't you? You're in it because you like it. You like making the products. I've not really seen that as much as a problem. But yeah, I think it's so developers, yeah, put yourself out there a bit more. Go and chat to people, you know. But yeah, it's more. I think the problem's more within an agile team. If you see people not really speaking much or not really speaking up, I think it's up to the other people to try and facilitate that a bit more. It's up to people, you know, if you're in a meeting with 7 people and someone's not speaking, and you can sometimes see they're sort of, but they just don't want to. As the facilitator, you should be the person to be like, do you have a comment? You know, do you want to add something? And just make sure that they feel comfortable to do that. And that sort of comes to all that sort of even marketing stuff, like no bad idea. You can't say anything stupid, you can't do this. And if you're in an environment where you don't feel judged, you should feel more comfortable to do that. If you only like speaking to computers, who knows, yeah. Who knows? If you can only speak code. But no, I don't, yeah. I mean, to be honest, most of the devs I've worked with have been friendly and nice and not really been much of an issue. It's more, I think, as with UX, so if you design something that can't be built, the developers will get a bit annoyed, or, you know, say developers can build anything, I'll add that in, so it can always be built, but if it's worth building. Whereas it's the same if a UX are like, no, the table will just look like this and it'll be bland. A UX will be like, no, but I want it to be nicer and I want sidebars and menus and all this flashy stuff. But it's just compromise, really, isn't it? It's just working. But I think the question goes for same developers, product owners, scrum masters, everyone in the team. It's everyone else should be keeping an eye on how everyone else is doing. You know, everyone else should be allowing folk the chance to talk and to sort of facilitate that. Say, so at the start of the talk, this was kind of mainly aimed at UX people, but if you're not a UX person, you can still help the UX people share ideas and bring it to the team and allow everyone to be open, yeah. Yeah. Sure. As long as you don't have a train to catch, that's fine. I'm fine.
I think, so you said that right at the beginning of the talk, you said a lot of people do UX at the start, like all UX is done quite a lot of time, and I've seen that, you know, UX is done way up front. That's really common, people do it at the end, way up front. One of the comments was you really want a 4-week sprint because the double diamond takes 4 weeks to do, right? So my question is, should UX be working in an agile way? Because most people aren't. And I'm not convinced that UX and agile, you even need to be agile. You seem to, like, I get iterative. I can get iterative, but you seem to be very much just, and that's not a negative comment, just, I'm not convinced you need to actually work And then I don't think you're gaining much from Agile.
I suppose, I mean, the sort of issue really is there's a lot of teams hiring UX people and expecting them to work in Agile. So whether that's that is the point of this is a conversation that needs to be had. There's a lot of pain points within just the working of trying to find out pain points. You know, maybe it's not working all the time. Some teams work better, as we all Agile. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I believe, you know, the Scrum teams I've worked in, sometimes it's very fast, it's very reactive. You know, sometimes if you're in a system and they start noticing a problem or a current problem, it needs fixed, and sometimes there won't be time to do UX. You know, sometimes there's not time to do content design, sometimes it's literally just someone, the product expert writes a paragraph and it's like, that's what needs done, go for it. But I think having the multidisciplinary team, so having people who can do everything, you know, sort of helps.
I completely agree. I think having UX is an absolute essential thing in a cross-functional team. I think you're doing like a really important job. I'm just not convinced you need to be part of the team.
Yes, it should be.
I think you should just be running in parallel.
Where would you have UX? So if you've got an Agile team working who want research.
So again, I'm not going to prescribe what I think, because like one of the big things about Agile is the processes come after the people. So you look at the people and work out what fits, right? So, but it's pretty clear from what I've seen and like the experiences, and I think a lot of us is there's quite a lot of cargo cult with this default position of chuck everyone in an Agile team and hope it works. And I'm not saying it doesn't, because out there people working at waterfall and it works perfectly for them, right? Let's not imagine that Agile is the answer to every problem we can imagine. But I mean, I don't have an answer to it, because I genuinely I don't know. But you know,
I don't think though.
I suppose it's just a controversial statement: is should you be in an Agile team? Or
Yeah,
should you
well, I
just
say
work in
that's part of the conversation. I think needs to be had. I think for some products, beforehand is better. For existing products, it needs to be after. You know, there's no alternative. But yeah, I think that's kind of what I want to look at. Yeah, is that sort of problem. So for me it was you've been hired as a UX designer. You've just been chucked in an Agile time. What now? You know, what are you going to do? You've been told.
No, absolutely, yeah.
I don't think your option is going to be I'm not doing it.
No, I'm not suggesting you don't do your job. I'm not suggesting this is for you to solve it. No, it was just a controversial
that is the sort
statement.
of conversation, is how do we work it, and that should be one of the benefits of Agile. You know, as Agile works on here's the problem, let's find the solution. Maybe this is a problem, people need to find a solution. Yeah, is what's the best way about it. Yeah.
Just one last point: Excel is the most successful product we have, and there's no UX in it.
I love Excel, yeah.
I mean, it's just one of these things, is whenever we all fail, and developers, technicians, whenever we all fail, Excel is the answer.
Yeah.
And there's something in there we should all just like really cringe, I think.
It's the solution. Only if you've got a good calculator next to it. That's
Nice dashboard. Can we get the data in Excel?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
There was an idea that spawned out, and you'd mentioned MVP before, and you mentioned the time. And it seems to me that one of the kind of issues you're hitting, or one of the barriers you're hitting in terms of a kind of a time cycle of deployment, is the size or scale of the MVP and the iterative improvement that you're wanting to do. So is that something that you're looking at or thinking about, or is there a way you can come up with more wireframe prototypes than the wireframe prototypes you're using?
Yeah, I think that certainly helps. So going on Excel, I've started doing some interaction design on PowerPoint because it's super simple. It's not coding to any level. It's literally just you can copy and paste text and you can show it to someone and they say, no. Yeah, well, that's good because that took me 5 minutes, not 4 hours, to put together. So definitely, yeah. And that goes back to low fidelity stuff. You know, you need to be careful. I was a graphic designer for a long time, and I used to mock stuff up and send it to someone and say, here is a mock-up. This is not the final design. This is an idea. No, it's rubbish. I'm going elsewhere. It's like, no, that's not it. It's an idea. The other hand, sometimes I would do like half what I was planning and say, this is the sort of idea. Oh yeah, perfect, I'll take it. So you can't fully understand what someone's going to expect. But there is certainly that, you know, if you're using Figma to design stuff, you can spend a lot of time making really nice interactions and really nice stuff. But you can also say to somebody, if you click this button, it'll take you here, just to see if it's the right sort of way, you know. So the levels, I don't think the levels is important as the explanation for why it's the way it is. And as you say, if it's MVP, if it's we've been using this system, we've just realised that this doesn't work well, we need a quick solution and we want to test it, yeah, you can quickly draw something up or make something up or illustrate it in some way. The sort of, I mean, the government design system, the way that works is you're sort of making a prototype which could be turned into the real thing. You know, if you do it well enough, you can add the back end in, you can make it live, and the prototype is almost used. So that is quite time consuming at times. You know, it's a lot more advanced than what I believe. I mean, I know quite a few UX people who are like, why are you coding? You know, and it's like, because that's the job. that's what it said I was to do. So, but yeah, I think the low fidelity stuff is just as important. Yeah, it's in the same way Agile teams and developers. You know, if you don't want to do, the whole point of Agile is not build the complete system over a 2-year period and release it. It's doing steps. So yeah, it's important.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a lot of good discussion and questions there. That's brilliant. So that's what we like to have at Lean Agile Edinburgh. And there's no daft ideas or questions. So keep that up for the next meetups. I used to be a developer many years ago, and sometimes with teams of developers, I know what you're saying, some of the folks about trying to draw them out, but you know, there's a whole wide range of personalities across the whole team, and it's a case of, I think back to the facilitation thing, is trying to, yes, Scrum Master probably should facilitate the team to try and get the most out of everybody in the team, but it's also every team's responsibility to do that as well. So but it's good to think about these things. So yeah, great. Okay, I think that's it. So thank you very much, Ricky. That was a great talk. And so that's us for tonight, really. So I'd like to say again a big thank you to everybody for coming along tonight. Thank you very much. Great to see everybody back in person. And our next meetup will be round about a month's time. Just watch themeetup.com for announcement when it comes out. Also, again, I'd like to thank People's Postcode Lottery for hosting tonight. Much appreciated. And might be back again. Who knows? Yeah. And yeah, thank you. And again, thanks to Product Forge for a live stream. That's great. And again, thanks to Nathan and Ricky for the talks tonight. It's great. So, I think that's us. So, I wish you well for the rest of the evening, and we'll see you next time. Thank you. Thanks.